Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I always say it, I'm so excited to be here with you today. I really want to get into today's episode. As you guys know, we are on a series on forgiveness. We are focusing on Ephesians 4:32, which I continue to say is not a suggestion, but is a commandment, where the Bible says, "Be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as Christ has forgiven you." Today, guys, I'm excited. I know I say this every week that I'm excited because I am, or every 2 weeks, I should say. But today I have one of my podcasting buddies, Neil Matthews, here. Welcome to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast, Neil Matthews.
Thank you, Amy. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we are so excited to have you. Been wanting to have you for a minute. Neil has a podcast, guys, and I will put it in the show notes, called Other People's Shoes. I have been on his show, and his show is a lot of fun. And he does things his way, and it is just an amazing podcast. He texted me a little while back saying that he was going to have a guest that he knew would be really, really important to me. And has that episode aired yet, Neil? With the singer from For Him?
Yes.
Okay, I've not.
He's out currently. Yes.
Somehow
Yes.
somehow I missed that. And so Neil and I share a lot in common, including we're both sports enthusiasts. Those of you who are watching on YouTube can see that he has North Carolina blue headphones on, and he bleeds NC basketball, especially. And then he loves to pick on me about my Jaguars, and you know what? Well deserved. And so, but anyway, so Neil, let's just jump right in. And so I talked about our core verse being Ephesians 4:32, and that's a really difficult verse if you've walked through some things that you needed to forgive. We also talk quite a bit on this podcast in this series about that passage in Matthew where the Bible says, "If you don't forgive, I won't forgive you." Could be the scariest verse in the Bible. We are starting every episode, and this season is completely unscripted. I don't have any questions to my guests, nor do they know what I'm going, nor do I even know what I'm going to ask until I get on. And so, really, just trusting the Lord to give us the stories that we need today here. But we are walking through a season where we want to help people understand that forgiveness doesn't look the same for everybody. It is a commandment and we must do it, but it doesn't look the same for everybody. And so the first question I'd love to ask you, Neil, is what does forgiveness mean to you? When you think of forgiveness, and you're not one to give me the Sunday school answer, so I know you're not going to do that, but what does, when forgiveness pops in your head, tell me what that means to you.
Well, I think forgiveness for me means that I'm going to no longer hold that against someone. I'm going to choose to let that go from maybe the pain, let that go from the hurt, let that go from a standpoint of saying, you don't owe me that anymore. I remember as a kid, my parents never gave money out. We didn't earn allowances or things like that. Anything we got, we had to earn, we had to work for. And so I think sometimes in my past, I used forgiveness kind of like that, like as a currency. Almost somebody had to earn it, had to work for it, it wasn't just willy-nilly given out. And I think for me, when I think of forgiveness, I think of the idea that it's a free gift given and somebody doesn't have to work for it, but they've maybe had to work hard to get it in some respects in the past. So I don't know if that answers it, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, no, it absolutely answers the question, because it is a choice. And I think that has been kind of standard, the most given answer. If in any and different ways people have said it is a surrender, it is a release, it is something that I have to choose. And that has been a reoccurring theme of people that have been on the show, is that I have to choose to forgive. And of course that looks different for everybody. And so I want to get into a little bit of your story, because I have heard bits and pieces of your own podcast, which again, guys, I'm behind on it, but Other People's Shoes podcast, fantastic podcast. Neil just is a very gifted interviewer, and really your desire to get into the hearts and minds of other people and the way their lives look and show it to us is so admirable. And so I know in my own listening to your podcast several times, I've heard you bring up the fact that your dad was a Marine, and that life wasn't always easy for you growing up. And so I guess my question to you, and I just want to jump right into this, and usually I ask guests, can you tell me of a time when you had to walk through forgiveness and what that looked like for you? And that is my question to you. But I do want to make sure that if you're comfortable, that we can talk about that, because I've heard on almost every time you've guested on a podcast or I've been on yours, you've referenced this difficult relationship with your dad, who was a United States Marine. I would love for you to walk us through what that looks like, if you're okay with that, and how you stay in a place of forgiveness. Not only how you got there, but how you stay there.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to again just give a little background. Yes. So part of my North Carolina obsession fandom comes from my dad being a Marine. He was stationed in a little place called Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is based out of Jacksonville, North Carolina. So I was actually born in North Carolina. I live in Oregon, which is always weird to people. But forgiveness kind of is one of those things that is tough when it comes to him. And I don't know where it comes from. I do remember as a kid, growing up in a military family, which is different than some. He was seldom there physically, and when he was there physically, he wasn't there emotionally, spiritually, in any fashion. Now, some would say that's part of the Marine life. Most Marines have a hard time turning off or shutting off when they walk through the front door. Some are very skilled at that, others are not. Little background on my dad, just to give some context as well. His dad was not very nice to him. He was very abusive. My grandfather, I only met him maybe about 6 times in my life. He's since passed, my grandfather. Um, but outside of that, I mean, I've heard stories. I don't really know him personally, my grandfather, but I've heard stories growing up that he was very abusive to not only my dad, but to my granny. That's what I call my grandmother. There's one story in particular about my dad's dad, that they were somewhere in like Bakersfield, California, which anyone that knows that, it's kind of the armpit of California, really hot, very humid. And my grandfather had come into some money, I guess, in some maybe nefarious ways, perhaps. And my uncle, my dad's oldest brother, decided to, for whatever reason, share with someone that he had this money. And so this person came calling for this money that he maybe have owed. Again, I don't know the whole story, but my grandfather basically made my uncle stay under a bed for the rest of the afternoon as punishment for basically divulging this money that was supposedly owed or whatever. So it just gives you kind of an idea of the man that my dad came from. My dad joined the Marine Corps at a very young age, right around 1971, just to put it in context. So Vietnam was on the table for sure, and he did go for about 2 weeks. Those of your older listeners may know this. Nixon, I guess, declared that there were no Marines in Laos. Well, my dad was in Laos, so again, give some context there. So his whole life came out of trial and turmoil. And so when he met my mom, I think both of them were kind of hurting people. What do? You know this, Amy, better than anyone. They hurt people. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, my parents did the very best that they could. I want to declare that 100%. They did the very best that they could with what they had. But the hard part is what's the aftermath of that? My dad and I are relatively good now. I do envy in some respects when I hear people having father-son kind of relationships, like they go camping or hunting or do all kinds of stuff, play catch, things like that with their dads still, or go to ball games or whatever. My dad and I don't do that. There'll be probably about a 2-month, maybe 3-month period that we don't even talk to each other. We don't even see each other. And what's weird is we live probably relatively about 45 minutes from each other, so relatively close. geographically speaking, we live and work and kind of share in the same community in a lot of respects, but our paths just don't naturally cross. And so that's the hard part. But yeah, so going back to your original question about, I can tell you exactly, November 25th, 2020, I had to look it up just to make sure. On my show, I was coming up on my 100th episode, and I was in a season called What Happened When, talking to people about events in their life, that's a significant event, specifically to a date. So all the episodes have a date tied to it. And so I sat down with my dad for the 100th episode, and I asked him this question. And our friend Meg Gleasoner actually reached out to me after the episode launched, and she said, I just can't believe his answer. So I asked my dad this question. I said, Dad, if you had to do it all over again, knowing what the Marine Corps did, knowing what happened to our family, everything, would you do it all again? And there's no pause. I don't like dramatic like music in the background. There wasn't like this moment where he's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'd totally like, I wouldn't do it. No, he said unequivocally, he said, I'd do it again in a second. And so from a son, not from an interviewer in that moment, it hurt because I was like, well, wait, we don't have a relationship because of the Marine Corps. We don't have a relationship because of the choices you made in the Marine Corps. So as a son, I had to get to a point of saying, you know, that's him. That's Gunny. By the way, that's what I call my dad. I don't even call him dad unless I absolutely need something or it's a 911 kind of an emergency. Generally, it's Gunny. I refer to him as Gunny. He was a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps just to help. And as I look up at the wall here behind me, there's actually a picture of him and I at my wedding, sitting on the front steps of the sanctuary. And we're laughing because he had just told me that he had just gotten an alien tattoo. And so I know that moment because we were laughing together, and the photographer, you know, happened to snap a photo of us. But I don't have too many photos of my dad and I together. There is one behind me. It's kind of in the foreground that I'm actually sitting on his lap. Now that's significant to me because out of all the photos, I'm the second in my family. I have a biological older brother. But out of all the family photos and everything that my mom has captured or family members have captured through the years, that is the only photo I have of my dad holding me. So
I'm struggling a little bit, and this has not been true on other interviews because I just count you as such a dear friend. And so I'm sitting across this Zoom meeting from you feeling what you're talking about, because while you and I don't have the same story, we have a very similar story, and that is a parent who chose someone or something else over us. And so I legitimately feel the pain right now, and especially as a man who those relationships with your dad are so important. And you, I don't know about you, Neil, my mom has since passed, but I know that if she was on this planet, that I would be doing everything I could to make her want me, to make her want to be around me, to make her want to spend time with me. My love language is quality time, and she never wanted that. And so I'm struggling as I hear your story, and I'm looking at you crying, and I'm really fighting back the tears because I care so much about you as my friend. And so I think that listeners, when you hear this episode, we are not light and fluffy up in here right now. I mean, this is hard stuff. These are relationships that God meant to be a certain way. And for Neil to grow up in a house with an absent father, it hurts. And this many years later, it still hurts, particularly if, you know, if you're still dealing with it. You live 45 minutes away, and you're still waking up every day to that pain of rejection, whether or not you know it or not. Do you find yourself, Neil? I interviewed somebody yesterday, and she had an interesting phrase that she said, I have learned that I will have a lifetime of forgiving. In this case, was somebody that sexually assaulted her. Do you find, whether you think about it or not, that so on that day in 2020, I think you said November or something, 2020, and I will definitely link that episode with your dad in here, so that they can hear that response. That just is like a knife in my heart. And so tell me what it looks like, Neil, what it feels like when you go to bed at night. There's two times I think that we do the best business with the Lord and we get the best ideas. One is when we lay our head on bed at night, and the other for me, for some reason, when I'm in the shower. Like I need chalk to write things down because I get the best ideas in the shower. But because you're a Christian, not all of our listeners are. That we are commanded to forgive. And so I know that you're walking towards that and you've done that and you will continue to do that. But what does that look like for you in your head? Is there this internal battle between, Lord, I have forgiven him. Why can't I have what I so desperately want? Um, I for some reason that song "Run to the Father" comes to my mind right now, and I want that so badly for you, Neil. But as we talk about this opportunity that you have every single day, he doesn't choose you to forgive. What does that look like for you?
Well, let's see, I'm 42 now. So I remember, I think it was about 2 years ago, because it was probably right before we did the episode. My brother has had some challenges with the law. He's had his kids taken away. He has chosen to kind of walk away out of their lives. I say that because, as a father myself, I can't even imagine walking away from my daughter's life. It's unfathomable for me. But my cousin was down at my dad's, and at the time of this story, my cousin, she's a year older than I am, and then my brother's 2 years older than I am. So she was right in the middle of us, kind of growing up, and we would spend our summers every so often together. And so her and my brother would team up against me, being the younger kid. So there was a lot of picking on moments, and there was a lot of moments where I was in trouble and they were not, or vice versa. So anyway, she was definitely, my brother's name is Corey. She's definitely Team Corey, I would say. And so anyway, so her name's Lisa. In any event, Lisa is at the table with my dad and some others. My wife is there and some other people are there. And so I will say, full disclosure, they were drinking, I was not. So a little bit of the context again. But I'm basically having this conversation with Lisa, even though others are around, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so I go into this kind of rant, if you will, of all my brother's, transgressions. Like, here's his rap sheet. Like, here's all the bad stuff Corey's done. Let's not look at any of the bad stuff Neil's done. Let's look at all the bad stuff my brother's done. And then I was like, well, look at all the good stuff Neil's done. Let's not focus again on any of the bad stuff. Let's focus on all the good stuff. And I look at her, and then I look at my dad and I said, I just don't get it. I've done all this amazing stuff. I'm successful in business. I have a great marriage. I haven't walked away from my kid, again, highlighting all the awesome stuff I've done. And my dad, head of the table, puts his hand up, like he's like raising his hand almost in class. And he said, well, I want to say something. And I said, no, you don't get to say anything. Now, mind you, I'm in his house.
And you're sober.
Yes, 100%.
Wow.
100%. And I said, you don't get to say anything. And he's like, wait a second, this is my house. This is my rules, kind of thing. And I said, no, you need to let me finish. And so again, I'm kind of going on my amazing achievements and all the stuff I've achieved and everything that's going on. And finally he raises his hand again and he said, you're done talking, in his military tone. I can't even do it to reenact. And he says, you just don't get it. And I said, don't get what? Now I'm exasperated. I'm like, don't get what? What don't I get? Please tell me what I don't get. Almost in anger. And my wife so gently puts her hand on my thigh, kind of squeezes it, which is our universal sign for shut your mouth. I think some spouses have that. Ours is that. And so I stopped. And he said, you just don't get it. He said, you were so focused on what your brother's doing, you never realized the whole time I saw it. And I said, please, saw what? Like, again, just spit it out. Yeah. And he's like, well, if you shut your mouth long enough, I'll tell you. It's my problem in life. And I said, okay, Gunny, tell me. And he said, you see, your brother failed a lot, later in his life. And he never really knew how to overcome failure. He failed and failed and failed and continued to fail and fail and fail and fail. But he never figured out how to get up because my mom and him, so my parents never really taught my brother how to fail right.
Mm.
Get yourself back up again. He said, but I started to realize with you that every time you failed, you would cry and whine because I'm a baby. And he said, but you would figure out a way to get up again. He goes, and let me tell you, you failed a lot growing up. You had, a rough go. But I started to realize that you're going to be okay because you're getting yourself back up again. And I said, well, I had to. No, nobody's going to pick me up. Nobody's going to, I've had to figure it out. You weren't there. And he said, yeah, I know. I'll own that. But he said, I stopped worrying about you. I stopped, he's going to be okay. That's what I told myself. He's going to be all right. Because look, he's back up again. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? He said, what did you want me to tell you? I'm proud of you. I'm proud that you survived. I'm really proud of you. I'm sure I've told you that. No, you never have, Dad. He said, well, I thought you knew. And I said, thought I knew what? Thought I never knew any of this. And he said, well, again, I realized that, you were going to be okay. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And so we're driving home that night. My wife looks over at me and she goes, so what are you going to do with that? The queen, as I call her, because she is Elizabeth. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, your dad just told you he was proud of you. How long have you waited to hear that? I was like, a really long time. And she said, so now what are you going to do with it? And I said, well, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. My dad is proud of me. And Amy, there's such a spiritual connotation even in that.
Yeah.
Because I think even for me as a believer, you mentioned that I'm a Christ follower, a disciple of Jesus. I do struggle on the daily. Is God proud of me? Is God proud of me as his son? Am I a beloved son of the King of Kings even? And that's a real tough place sometimes to remind myself that not only my heavenly Father's proud of me, but my earthly Father's proud of me. What else do I care about? What else should I care about? And I think so many times I get bogged down in the muck and the mire, and I'm like, well, Joey doesn't like me. Jojo doesn't like me. Susie doesn't, I get wrapped up into that. Yeah. And I have to remind myself that that's it. That's all that I'm working for.
Right. Let me ask you this. Do you have any memories of your dad telling you that he loves you?
Growing up, no, I do not. It wasn't probably till I got married. So I got married in 01. So it probably wasn't until I was an adult, really. Yeah.
Well, I want to share something with you before I ask my next question. And yes, I am crying because this is just so powerful. And it's interesting to me how two people can feel this parental rejection. You growing up, and I'm air quoting when I say this, in an intact family, and me and the foster care system, but that pain of rejection is the same. And I was very similar, Neil. I mean, by the time I was in sixth grade, I was a budding entrepreneur. I was doing well in school. It was achieve, 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 because maybe somebody then will love me. Maybe my mom, if I do well in math, my mom loved math. I hated math. Neil, I do have legitimate PTSD, and then I have like a low key PTSD from learning how to do long division. But that was the only way that I could get her attention, was math, right? And to this day, I still hate math. I'm in grad school and I'm in a stats class and I'm losing my mind. But I don't have any memories of her telling me that she loved me. And I did the same as you, though. I hit it hard, full throttle. You know me well, and people under the sound of my voice, if you listen to my podcast, I have two speeds: start and stop, the end. There's nothing in the middle. And so as I've gotten older, and I'm a little bit older than you, not much, but a little bit older than you, I am slowing down in terms of, that. And this was brought to my attention through, I have an Enneagram coach, and originally this was going to be an Enneagram episode, but I wanted to go a different direction with it. But one of the things that she taught me, because my kind of personality is that personality that my greatest fear is being unwanted and unloved, and those things were absolutely realized for me. And so what I did was the same as you: produce, 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 wanting anybody, somebody, but mainly my mom, to tell me that I'm proud of you and that I love you. I work on a behavioral health unit, and every now and then, a patient their meds will kick in, and I will see them acting completely different. And I use those words: I'm proud of you. But one of the things I wanted to share with you is when I started my work on this, and why do I perform, and why am I still seeking the approval and love of somebody that's not even here anymore? And one of the things that was pointed out to me by Carissa Harrison was, when Jesus was baptized, when John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the Jordan River, and the dove was sent down, and the God the Father said, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." He had not performed a single miracle up until that point. And so I want to speak into your life, Neil. And one of my favorite songs is by I think it's by Maverick City, Gyra. And it starts out was, I wasn't holding you up, so I could never let you down. Gyra, I've never been more loved than I am right now. And I think for some of us, and I wonder if this is true for you too, like, I forgave my mom. And I don't know why or how. I wish I could tell that story if I was on somebody else's podcast. I just did. Like, I kind of realized that she was broken too. And same with my ex-husband John. But now I find that I struggle a little bit more with forgiveness as I have stepped into that belovedness of being his daughter. But I too struggle with him being the father. The Bible says, "What father who loves his son who asked for a piece of bread would give him a snake?" Lots of them, right? You reached out and asked, by your behavior for your dad, "Can you please just play catch with me? Can you please just pay attention to me so that I don't have to act out, so that you can pay attention to me?" And so I just wanted to speak that into you. And for those of you listening out there, this is a guest that we have that is on the daily having to make this transaction of forgiveness. And you heard what he said at the beginning, that forgiveness meant to him is not to hold it against them, and to work through it. And so, for those of you out there listening, know that you can be currently living in this betrayal and this hurt and this pain, and it's still Ephesians 4:32 commandment. You have to forgive. And so, Neil, I wonder if, before I throw you a curveball, and it is going to be a curveball, pretend there's other Neil Matthews out there, and there are plenty, with absent parents, who just have this big gaping hole in their heart, that live with it like you do. And they know they have to forgive. They know they have to live in a spirit of forgiveness. What advice would you have for them?
Well, I think the greatest advice I would say is don't wait. You know, if anything in this world I have learned, and I think the Apostle Paul says, I've learned to be content in all things, no matter the circumstances. I emphasize that word learned. He didn't come by it. He didn't trade for it. He learned it. In other words, he had to kind of understand it and get around that. So I would say I have truly learned this, that do not wait. Yeah. You don't have a guarantee of tomorrow. Like tomorrow, I think, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I might not have that tomorrow.
Right.
And I think that's been real prevalent in my life of late. I've lost, in the last probably, 10, 15 years, I've lost a lot of dear people to me that I waited on. I thought, oh, I have more time with Leon. I don't need to go see him today. I regret that. I have more time with this friend. Maybe they moved away. I have more time with whatever. I just have made it a point to say, if that person jumps into my mind, whoever it may be, it's my dad, maybe, or it's my mom, or whoever, my sister, whoever it may be, I pull out my phone and I call him, or I send him a text or something, because I don't know. I don't have that guarantee. There is no guarantee in that. So I would say, don't wait. The second thing I would say is, when you go with 2 ears and shut your mouth.
Yeah.
Which is really hard for me. As you can kind of tell, I like to talk. And so I think so many times, again, another skill that I have learned over the last 4 years truly is learning to listen well. So I would say, don't wait, listen, and be willing to let go. That's the point too, is annually. It seems to be annually around March, my dad and I will get together. His birthday's March 21st, mine's March 10th. So there's an about 11-day gap. By the way, for many years, he forgot my birthday. So I'm still trying to figure that out. Like, it's 11 days before yours. Like, how do you forget that? Anyway, I press forward. So there's this like 11-day gap where we'll get together for lunch or something. We stopped exchanging presents years ago because it just was silly. Yeah. But every year around, again, our birthdays, we get together, and he allows and truly allows, I'm allowed to ask any questions I want. Nothing's off the table. And so I'll generally go and I'll say, well, what about this moment in your life? Or what about this, thing in him and my mom are divorced. So I'll ask questions about their marriage or their relationship or things like that. Stuff that was none of my business as a kid, but now as an adult, I think somehow it's my business. So, but I have that, I guess, leeway or that grace, I guess. I don't know what it is. So I would say, go and meet, make that happen, make that a priority. So obviously don't wait, go and listen. I think I forgot something else, but be willing to forgive. Maybe that was the other one. And then meet with them. I think those are the keys.
And I
you
think
do those things, I think you'll be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's some intentionality about those things that you mentioned too, right? I'm going to obey Ephesians 4:32. And I continue to maintain in April will be 3 years since I've been doing this podcast. And I have been trying my best to curate episodes and you do this really well, by the way, to curate episodes that also speak truth into the people who are not Christ followers. And I still continue to do that. And there are plenty of people under the sound of my voice right now who don't believe in Jesus at the start of the story. But I will tell you, Neil, that in 2.5 years of doing this and listening to people and in doing my own work, I can't figure out how to live a victorious life without leaning into the sovereignty of God, without believing in the star of the story. And that's just kind of the way it goes. But I will tell you that advice is good advice, because my listeners heard me tell my story of forgiveness, and my mom died on a ventilator that I had to sign to take her off at 19 years old. And I never told her that I forgave her. And to this day, on October 25th, 2022, I was 19 years old. So that was a very long time ago. I regret that she stepped out into eternity without me telling her that I forgave her. She didn't deserve my forgiveness, but I don't deserve the forgiveness that I get either. And so I maintain that verse in Matthew, and there's another one in Colossians that says something that's very similar. You forgive because I've forgiven you. I think it's a superpower that we're given when we accept the blood-bought forgiveness that we've been given. When Jesus died and his blood changed the soil of that earth forever. I was telling somebody yesterday, we got to remember that blood was for your assailant. That blood was for my mom, for my husband. That blood was for Hitler. That blood was for everybody. We all need forgiveness as much as we need to forgive. So here comes the curveball. I've heard you a couple times on podcasts talk about a time when you yourself were in desperate need of forgiveness. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that, because you can bring a unique perspective in that you walked through a period that could have been catastrophic. but you needed forgiveness from somebody very important in your life. And I was wondering, because you, more than any guest that I am bringing on, can speak to this. What was that like, needing forgiveness, being on the other side of this?
Well, I mean, I think it's no secret that, again, church life is the best life, maybe. I don't know. But I will say this. I think I'm totally off on what you're asking. So if I am, then you can somehow take this part out. I don't know. But um, I was about, I think it was about a year into my show, and I had just gone through a pretty awesome season. I thought my first season was pretty, successful, saw some movement as far as downloads and things like that. Still had no idea what I was doing. But our church asked all of us youth leaders to read this book called You Lost Me. And I'm not a reader. And so I tell guests that come on that are authors, I'm like, listen, if you want to send me your book, that's fantastic. I won't probably read it by the time you come on. I probably will never read your book. However, if you send it to me, I'm happy to put it in somebody's hand that will most likely read it and enjoy it and use it as a gift. Most of the time, they're like, cool, we'll send you one. So I say that because I started reading this book called You Lost Me. And when I say reading, I listened to it because, again, not a reader. But I listened to it about 4 times all the way through. And I kept in my heart feeling like I needed to do a season on people leaving the church. And so I went with my executive producer at the time. I had one. He was very awesome. His name's Garrett. And he comes on from time to time. He comes on pretty much every Christmas. He signed an exclusive deal with me from now till the end of the show that he'll come on every Christmas. So listen to Garrett at Christmas time. But I say that because I went to Garrett. We were having lunch one day brainstorming. And I said, hey, Garrett, I think I want to do a series on people leaving the church. He's like, man, that's awesome. And so we start lining up guests, and I'm reaching out to old youth kids because I'm a youth guy, youth pastor, and interviewing old youth kids, which was awesome. It was so cool for me to kind of, now they're adults, kind of talk about what they experienced in youth group and, what they learned, what they didn't, what they liked, what they didn't. But again, I was still kind of fine tuning what I was doing. So we're kind of winding down towards the end, and I always do seasons. My show comes in seasons. It sounds like much like yours. And so I was like, Garrett, I don't know what we're going to do for the season finale. I always try to have somebody like awesome and amazing for the season finale. You want to start well and kind of finish well. So those are kind of the 2 bookends I would kind of look for with people. And he said, well, what about your old pastor? And I was like, Garrett, that is an absolutely terrible idea. Like, I might have to fire you if I was paying you, because that is a dumb idea. He's like, no, I really think you should pray about it and ask the Lord if you should have him on. I said, well, first off, he's not going to come on because we haven't spoken in probably about 15 years. So probably not going to happen. He's like, well, I really think you should pray about it. I was like, fine. So I did. I took his advice. I prayed about it. I kept feeling this overwhelming no, absolutely not. But that was me saying that, not God. And so finally I said, okay, I'm going to ask. What's the worst that can happen? Again, we haven't talked in probably about 15 years, really talked in about 15 years. And so I called a friend of mine who got me his number, because I deleted his number, took it out of my phone, which if you get out of my phone, that's big time, I think. And so I called him up. His name's Lee. And I said, got his voicemail like always, in the past. So I said something to the effect of, hey, Lee, this is Neil. I know we haven't talked in a long time, but hey, my church just had me, listen to this book called You Lost Me. It's about people leaving the church. And I just wanted to tell you that you really meant a lot to me. I really learned a lot from you. You brought me under your wing. You taught me a lot about ministry. You taught me how to love people. And you taught me how to be a great pastor. And I really wrecked that. And I want an opportunity to sit with you and just talk with you. I'm doing this podcast thing. I can tell you more about it when you call me back. Here's my number. That was it. So like 4 days go by. I mean, it was quite a while. Might have been longer. And I thought, well, okay, now we're going to have to find somebody, because he's clearly said no, because he hasn't called back. And I remember I was driving home one night and his number popped up on my phone, and I took this deep breath like, oh my God, here we go. I have no idea what is going to be on the other end of this phone. I really don't. So I answered in the car and I said, hey, this is Neil. And he said, hey, this is Lee. And there's silence. And I'm thinking, did the call drop? And he is in tears. And he said, I don't know what a podcast is, but I am so blown away by your message. I listened to it 7 times because I wanted to make sure I really heard what you had to say. I would love to meet with you. Let's set that up. And so we did. We met in my old church, and we walked back through why I left the church. So here's why I left the church. Just a spoiler alert. By the way, if you want to go hear that episode, it is in our second season. It's called You Lost Me, and came out August 28th, 2019. So you can look that up.
I'll put that one in the show notes for sure.
Yeah. But I left the church because at the time I was on staff. I was a youth pastor on staff, not only youth pastor, but associate pastor. But I had for years struggled with an addiction with pornography, and that had reared its head. And so that led to my resignation. They asked for it and I gave it willingly. And so what led to that then is it also led to me leaving the church. Now, not the whole church, big church, C word, little church, C word. I left that community of church and went searching for a new church. Ironically, the church I go to now is called New Beginnings. So kind of poetic. God's funny in that way. But I say that because 15 years had passed at that point almost. And to walk back through hearing him and asking him for his forgiveness was huge because, again, I was on staff at a church. I let people down. I let God down. I let the church down. I let him down. I let a lot of people down. And so there was a lot that I was carrying. And I felt like I needed to go and kind of reset the room and reset him and I. And as we wrap the interview, this isn't on air, as I'm packing up my equipment, because there's a lot of equipment when it comes to podcasting. People don't realize that. And as I'm packing stuff up, yeah, a lot of money. And as I'm packing my stuff up, he's my back's to him, so I'm not like facing him, wrapping up cords and stuff. And he said, "Hey Neil, are we good?" Which is his universal sign for like, we're okay, right? That was kind of his phrasing back in the day when I was on staff. And I was like, "Oh yeah, Lee, we're good, we're great." He goes, "No, look at me." And so I turn around, and he's got tears just streaming down his face. And he goes, "No, are we good?" I gave him this big old hug. And by the way, he's probably about 6'4". He's probably about 2. Well, I'm not gonna give his weight, but he's a big dude. He's a lineman. Like he played lineman in high school. So he's a big dude. And I just gave him this big old bear hug. And I said, "Absolutely, we are good. And I am so grateful that we were able to do this." And he said, "I don't know what a podcast is still." He said, "But I'm grateful that you gave me an opportunity to kind of share." So
wow. Let me take that one step further, because I want to know what it, so I can imagine the release that felt. And so this addiction to pornography, having been on the other side of that, it's very painful as a wife. Can you talk to me a little bit about that relationship, and receiving her forgiveness and what that felt like to you? Because I want people to know the freedom that comes in forgiveness on both ends, both when we give it and when we receive it.
Yeah, I think for me and my wife, obviously we've been married 21 years, so it hasn't been just Hallmark movies and Disney Channel moments. Obviously there's been some trauma, there's been some challenges, and I think probably the greatest thing about my wife is her ability to forgive. She did not have to. She chose to. Obviously, I'm extremely grateful that she did. So I can't really speak to how she felt ultimately, because I don't. I mean, I know, but that's her part to tell, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I know it's happened. I know she is. Again, she's chosen to do that.
What
but
does
I'll
that feel like for you? Tell me what that feels
yeah,
like.
I was going to say, I can definitely tell you how it felt for me. So it feels for me, obviously, just tremendous relief.
Yeah.
That, I took our marriage for granted in a lot of respects. And I took her love and even forgiveness for granted in a lot of respects. And so for me, it feels freeing, and I think it also, again, going back to what I was saying about not waiting, to me, it's one of those moments to say, I'm not going to allow any time to pass in any way with her and I. If we ever have disagreements, I don't allow that to take place. And again, I'm grateful because she didn't have to. She did not have to. And so for me, that's such a freeing moment to know that not only she loves, but she supports, and she's such an encouragement as far as that goes. So
Well, and it's a beautiful picture of the church. It's a beautiful picture of what Jesus did for us. And if you have ever, and we all have hurt people, if you've ever received the forgiveness of somebody, you know then the gift that you're giving to somebody who has hurt you. It is not simple. It is not easy. It is required of us. But so Neil has been able to tell us today both sides of that. And I can't imagine, I hurt somebody, a really close friend of mine, about a year ago. And I walked around, I mean, she forgave me almost instantly, but I walked around with that heaviness on me for weeks because I couldn't understand this concept of forgiveness. I don't like to hurt people. No one likes to hurt people, but guys, forgiveness is so, so powerful. And so, Neil, thank you for being here today. I really, really, really encourage all of you guys to go into the show notes, click on contact Neil, which will be his what do you call that thing? Link tree. So it will be his link tree, but I'm also going to link a couple of episodes on his own podcast, Other People's Shoes, OPS podcast. Very, very gifted interviewer, and really cares about the people on the other side of the microphone. And so today, I hope that you have understood how powerful forgiveness can be on both sides. Neil is actively living a life that is pleasing to the Father in heaven, that he admittedly has a hard time having a relationship with because of the absence of his own father, but yet he still lives with this pain, and he has to choose every single day to forgive. And guys, if you have not noticed so far in this season, that has been the hallmark. It has been what everyone has said, is that I have to choose to forgive. You have two choices. Choose the commandment, guys, not the bitterness. And so, Neil, thank you for being here today. I love you. You've had me in some tears today. Neil came to do this interview at 5:30 a.m. his time, and I was complaining about having to be up at 8:30. And so, Neil, thank you for being here. The Wednesdays with Watson podcast listeners are going to be so blessed by your story, and then I definitely want them to go over to your podcast. And so I always give the microphone to my guest at the very end. Do you have anything else that you would love to share with our listeners?
Well, I think the big thing I would just share is, just to remind people one more time, is the idea that if you're not walking in wisdom, what are you truly walking in?
Yeah.
And if you're not out there seeking wisdom, what are you truly seeking after? Because I think so many times we hear forgiveness and we think, oh, that sounds wonderful. I love forgiveness. But the act of actually walking it out,
Yeah,
for me, is like drinking banana milk. It is the nastiest thing on the planet. I hate bananas. I hate everything about them. The idea of drinking banana milk sounds terrible. Oof. But sometimes I have to drink some banana milk.
yeah.
And I think that's the key to this whole thing, is if you're not willing to have some wisdom and to truly walk that out and to really listen, you're really staying trapped. I don't know about anybody else. I don't
Yeah.
like being trapped either. So that's
Such
what
a
I would.
such a great analogy. It's, it's the think of the thing that you hate the most, that you really don't want to do, and that is the journey of forgiveness. And one day we will stand before a holy God who will judge us, quite frankly, based on whether or not we have done this. And so, walk out in wisdom, guys. We will be back in 2 weeks with another story of someone and their journey to forgiveness as we are in this season. I have no idea how long this season will be. I know that people just keep popping in my mind that can come and share the truth of the gospel in their story. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat it anymore. And what I will say to you, and I say this on every episode, Neil, is if you are out there and this podcast is listened to all over the world except for Antarctica, still can't get the Antarctica listener. And if you are out there and you don't know the star of the story, you don't even know who we're talking about, but you're sitting in a dark room and you're driving in your car, you're on a run, you're listening to this podcast, and you want to know more about how you can know this Jesus, the Jesus that gave Neil the ability to forgive his father and gives Neil the ability to continue to forgive his father, and the same God who gave that pastor and his wife the ability to forgive Neil. And so what a beautiful representation we've had here today of both giving and receiving forgiveness. Remember, guys, Ephesians 4:32 is not a suggestion. It is a commandment. Well, Neil, I end every podcast saying the same thing. And I especially love saying this to people that I just deeply care about. And by the way, you're one of those people who you'll pop in my head, you and Sean McCoy, you'll pop in my head and I'll just shoot you a text and ask you how you're doing. And so I loved that you mentioned that, and you do the same for me. So I count you as my friend, even though we've never met in real life. I'm so grateful for you and for your ministry. And I mean this with my whole heart as I speak it over you and I speak it over the Wednesdays with Watson listeners. Today, Neil, as you start your day, you are, just know this, you are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are so, so valued. And so as Phil Baker's song, a song called Marked by You, plays us out of the podcast, Neil, thank you for being marked by Jesus. Thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Amy.
All right, guys, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, you remember that you matter.
Here I am, you can see that I'm nowhere near where I want to be.